So thank you everyone for attending. This is our letters of evaluation session, and what I'm going to do is review the different types of letters that you can get, and then talk about the types of letters that you can get through the pre-health office, the different reasons that you might explore the different types of letters, a little bit about our deadlines and requirements, and then a little bit about how to talk to people that you're requesting letters from. So, there are three different types of letters that you can request. So there's the committee letter, the letter packet, or individual letters. The committee letter is kind of the gold standard in um, letters. And so for committee letters, for most people who are just graduating or currently a student, just graduating, or within 3 years of graduation, the best option is to apply with a committee letter. So we hope you'll work with our office in order to qualify for a committee letter. Now, we do have a lot of deadlines and requirements for the committee letter. The first deadlines are coming up soon. On January 31st, we require the applicant agreement and the self-assessment. Again, the applicant agreement will tell you all the future deadlines and requirements. The self-assessment will allow you to think about all of the different things that you've done. You'll make a copy of the downloadable PDF, fill that out, complete it, send it to me, and then once I receive that, I open up a folder for you. We will be using those self-assessments when we put together your committee letter. So the pre-health office does write a part of your committee letter, and we use those self-assessments in the committee letter. So the better job that you do with your self-assessment and your MedApp track, the better job we can do with the committee letter. The letter packet includes full content of all the letters that you receive. It does not require that you meet all of the deadlines. It just requires that you meet all of the other requirements. So if you miss a deadline, a letter packet is a good alternative for you. A couple quick questions here. If you sent in a self-assessment last year or you did an applicant agreement last year, we do still require that you do the applicant agreement again. It will only take you about 3 minutes, but we just want to make sure that you write down all the dates and deadlines. And we do require a new self-assessment. Obviously, the self-assessment that you did last time will pretty much cover everything. We just want you to add the New Year's information, so you don't have to redo everything. If you did something last year in a self-assessment, you can just add to the old self-assessment. I do recommend downloading the new self-assessment because I did add new information to it, and the new information is kind of thinking about what the schools will be looking for. So do complete that new information. We don't really care about what format it's in. It's easier for us if it's all on one sheet, but if it's going to be too complicated for you, you can send it in two different documents. That's fine with us. So for the letter packet, we require the 4 required letters, and we'll talk about the letters. So you do still need to meet all of the letter requirements. It's more if you either number 1, miss a deadline, or number 2, if you look at all of the things that we require of you and you say, well, I don't want to do all of that. We will still send you a letter. We will still send out a letter packet for you. And then the third option is individual letters. And most people who get individual letters are people who have graduated maybe more than 3 years ago and have been working, so they feel that the compilation of letters that are required for a letter packet are no longer the best representation of who they are because they have significant work experience. And so they feel, well, I would rather have more reference about my work experience and maybe a little bit less about my academic experience, because although obviously the academic experience is important because you're applying to school, um, people feel like, well, I just want to highlight the work experience a little bit more. So you should be aware that schools will expect a committee letter from you if you're a current student or a recent alumni. Northeastern is known for doing committee letters, so if you apply without a committee letter and you're not, an alumni who's been out for 3 or more years, you may be asked why you don't have a committee letter if you apply with a letter packet or individual letters. It doesn't mean that you won't be accepted, but you should have a good answer to the question, why did you apply without one of these two, without the committee letter? So committee letter requirements, we require, and this is written in all of our information, but just to go over it, we require 3 internal letters of evaluation, 2 of which are meant to have to be from biology, chemistry, math, or physics faculty, and then the third faculty member from any discipline. These are faculty who have taught you in a class, not a lab TA. TAs are still students themselves, so they don't have the depth of experience that a regular faculty member has. We require an external clinical letter from a practitioner in the field which you are applying to. If you're applying to an MD program, we require a letter from an MD. If you're applying to a DO program, we require a letter from a DO. If you're applying to both, we require an MD and a DO letter. These need to be from experience in a clinical setting in the U.S. within the last 18 months, and we do not allow recommendations from relatives. We recommend against close family friends as well. Those letters from close family friends or people who know you too well tend to come across as too personal a recommendation and not objective enough, and you really want to make sure somebody's talking about you in as objective a manner as possible. And then we allow up to 2 additional letters, so those additional letters can come from a co-op supervisor, work supervisor, community service supervisor, from somebody that you've done research with. Sometimes people have some really solid clinical experience with somebody who wasn't a practitioner in the field that they're applying to. So maybe they did a PT co-op and they were supervised by a physical therapist and they want a physical therapist to write a letter, and that's fine. Or maybe they're applying to a DO program and they have an MD letter. An MD letter can be a great letter as a second letter, one of those 2 additional letters. So there's a wide variety of things that you can use for those additional letters. Again, you do need to meet all of the timeline and all of the requirements, and those are outlined on the applicant agreement. And the first one is coming up pretty soon. Letter packets, again, we do require the same 4 mandatory letters, so the 3 faculty letters, the clinical letter. We allow up to 2 additional letters. It's pretty much the same thing except that you do not get an additional letter from the pre-health office. Instead, you get a cover page from the pre-health office. And then individual letters, you actually will not have letters sent directly to the pre-health office. So this is something to note if you feel like I'm not going to be able to get 2 faculty BCMP letters, or if you think I know I'm not going to be able to get a letter of recommendation from a practitioner in the field that I'm applying to, you would apply directly to the service, the application service, and the people who are writing your letters would upload the letters directly to the letter service. So they would just write a letter on letterhead and upload it directly. It wouldn't come through the pre-health office at all. There isn't a specific requirement for letter writers, although if you look at the school websites, most of the schools want to see a couple faculty letters, probably at least one of those being a science faculty, and we definitely recommend a clinical letter. And again, if you're not an alumni who has been out of school for, more than 3 years or so, you may be asked about this either at an interview or before being invited to an interview. So you should just be aware of that. So just to talk a little bit more about how we put together our committee letters, when faculty send us letters, they send us letters in a Word document, and they write the body of what they want to say. So basically the body of the letter they'll write. Your external evaluators will write a full letter on letterhead with the date, the signature, and PDF form. And so when we put together our letters, the committee letter will start with a letter from the pre-health office. Then it will include the body of the letter from your faculty letter. So it'll be the body of their letter. And above that, it will say the name of who's writing the letter, their degree, so are they a PhD? Most of them will be a PhD. The department they're with and their title. So are they a lecturer, professor, assistant professor? And then the body of the letter, it's already on Northeastern letterhead because it comes from our office on our letterhead. So we don't require them to put it on their letterhead. It just makes it a little bit easier for the faculty. The external letters, we include the entire letter. So it'll just be a PDF copy of the full letter. And some of the secondary applications will actually ask you about this. Is it going to be a letter on letterhead? When we do the committee letters, excuse me, it's the exact same thing, except without the letter from us. It's still on our letterhead. It just has a cover sheet on our letterhead, the content of the faculty letters with their name, title, degree, and department, and then a whole copy of the letter from the external writers. Who should you ask for letters? Obviously, for internal letters, you need science faculty who have taught you. In a lab class, you want to make sure to ask someone, at least one professor from within your major, at least one professor from outside your major. If you have, I've seen before people who are, say, a chemistry major who only ask chemistry professors, so they have 3 chemistry letters, and that kind of raises an eyebrow, like, does this person not get along with anybody other than chemistry professors? Also, chemistry professors are probably going to talk about pretty similar skill sets. You want somebody who's talking about something slightly different. Also, what's even more suspicious is if you don't have anybody from within your major writing you a letter, because then they think, well, you had a core set of professors. Did you not establish a relationship with any of them? For BNS students, of course, that's a sort of a combined major of psychology and biology. So you would want somebody who's either a psychology or a biology person, since there isn't really a BNS major. And people ask, well, what do faculty talk about? So I just looked at some of the letters that I have, and these are what I have up now are some descriptors that faculty have used when describing students or applicants. And you can kind of see these are things that schools want to hear about when they're reviewing applicants. So when you're thinking about, okay, who is it that I want to ask for a letter, you want to think about people who would use sort of this type of language when they're talking about you. You want somebody who will talk about you in terms of being not just somebody who memorizes, is a rote memorizer, but is a critical thinker, is, capable and competent and fast on their feet, self-driven, mature, reliable, a natural problem solver, because these are the things that make for an effective physician. For external letters, obviously you need one clinician in the field that you're applying to. Other letters can be from researchers, supervisors, community service people. And again, you want to think about those AAMC competencies. Even if you're applying to dental or osteopathic school, they're a really good guideline for what the medical schools are looking for. So when you're thinking about who you're going to ask to write you a letter, you want to think about getting sort of a balanced perspective. You're asking a clinician who's probably going to talk about, your social skills, your service orientation, your ability to make patients feel comfortable, your ability to take information to the classroom and integrate it into a practice-based environment. So you want to think about asking people, and actually here are some of the words that I pulled from some of the external letters. So you want to think about asking for people who will talk about a different skill set. So researchers, a lot of people who have done research will get a research letter. And then beyond that, you want to think about, what are some other aspects? Some people who have, for example, been an RA will ask either the resident advisor, the head of the building, um, or the head of Res Life to talk about their leadership and mentoring abilities, for example. Or people who have done a lot of community service may talk to somebody who is a supervisor for community service, to talk about service orientation, cultural competence, teamwork. So, question, is it okay to have 3 physicians as your external references? Um, One thing that you want to avoid is having 3 external references who are all going to say pretty much the same thing about you. If somebody writes a letter and says, whatever about you, and then somebody else is saying pretty much the exact same thing about you, the schools don't necessarily need to hear the same thing, 3 times. They don't need 10 people to say something about you. If one person says it, they believe it. Um, so, I mean, if you feel like, well, the only 3 external references I have are physicians from shadow experiences, then, it's fine to ask them. If you have different experiences with physicians, that may be a better way. So maybe you did research with one physician and shadowed with a different physician, and you want to, when you sit down and you talk to the evaluators, you want to talk to them about, I have somebody else who's really talking about my shadow experience. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about me from the research perspective. That's fine. Uh, Again, what you want to avoid is having, a whole bunch of letters that say exactly the same thing, because you're losing the opportunity to have somebody talk about another aspect of you. So there's nothing wrong with having overlapping letters. It's just you kind of miss an opportunity by doing that. Okay. So process. Before sending out a letter request, first talk to your evaluator and, set up an appointment and talk to them in person before you send them the request. So the first time that they hear that you want a letter from them should not be when you send the letter request. People will either email or call the evaluator and say, wondering if I can set up a time to meet with you and talk with you about, a letter of recommendation for medical school. It's a good idea to do it that way, because if for whatever reason they feel like they can't write you a recommendation, then they can say at that time, thank you for thinking of me, but at this time, I just don't think I have the time in my schedule to be able to write a letter. And you know that, you should go on and talk to somebody else so they don't have to deny you in person. If they say, yes, I'd be happy to talk to you about it, then odds are pretty good that they're going to be willing to do it. Um, when you go in to talk to them, make sure that you have things pretty well mapped out. So bring a copy of your resume, your transcript. If you have a good draft of your personal statement, bring that along. You want to bring along a copy of the AAMC competencies, and there is a really good brochure that the AAMC has put together. It's on the PreHealth website, and I'll actually, when I finish with this, I will put this on the student applicant, the recent workshops page, and I'll put the brochure below that, a link to the brochure below that. I would recommend just downloading that brochure and bringing that along with them. It's put together by the AMC, and it lists, what our school is looking for. And it talks about the competencies. It talks about, for faculty, not focusing too much on the grade that you earned, because they can see the grade on the transcript. What they really want to know more about is, how did this student do in relation to other students in the class? What were they like in the classroom? What was their thought process like? Were they somebody who was, again, a good critical thinker? But they don't want the letter writer focusing on the grade, because they can already see it. Make sure to let your letter writer know if you plan to waive your rights. We do recommend that you waive your rights to your letter. I know it's hard because everyone wants to read their letters, but there is a perception among medical schools that if you haven't waived your rights, it's because you may be letter shopping. And what letter shopping means is you've asked 10 people for letters. You're going to read all the letters and send in the 5 best letters. We don't allow you to do that. So, giving them the perception that you might have done that is kind of a point against you in your application. Once you've talked to the evaluators, then your next step is to go into MedAppTrack and send them a request for the letter, and you'll do that in the letters section. Letters of evaluation section is pretty self-explanatory. You just go in, you put in the letter request, and you send it out. You can send them all out at the same time. You can send them out one at a time right after you talk to each evaluator. That's fine. Either way is fine. We require an institutional email address, so no Gmail, Hotmail, Comcast, etc. And you can talk to me about an exception to that. It is really important. We cannot accept letters from like Gmail or Hotmail accounts, because anybody could set up an account in theory and write their own letter and send it to us. Not that I think that you guys would ever do that, but we don't want there ever to be any question that one of our students may have done that, because unfortunately there are people out there who do things like that. So, and in fact, some of the secondary applications ask questions about things like that. So if I get a letter from an evaluator from a Gmail or a Comcast or any of those other email addresses, I actually email them back and say, I'm sorry, I can't accept this letter. Do you have an institutional email address, or can you print this off and snail mail it to me? Which, to be honest, letter writers find a little annoying. So if you put the letter request in wrong, you're going to annoy your evaluators, and that's not what you want to be doing. You want to make it as simple and seamless as possible. And just to kind of illustrate, to give you a story, I had a letter writer last year who sent their letter from a Gmail address, and I emailed them back and said, I'm sorry, I can't accept this. Do you mind just snail mailing it to me or sending it from an institutional email address? And the letter writer was so upset that he took his diploma from his medical school off the wall and out of the frame, and his medical license, same thing, off the wall and out of the frame, scanned copies of them, and emailed me scanned copies from the same email address and said, now do you believe that I am who I say I am? And I said, okay, if that means that much to you. But you can see you do not ever want to have that situation happening around your letters, because it's not positive. So once you receive, so just one last thing, if somebody works in a private practice and they only have like a Gmail or whatever, talk to me about it. I can write a note, I can give you permission to send it to that address and just write a note. And then you would just let them know that, okay, if I'm going to send it to this address, you'll just have to mail a copy of the letter to the pre-health office on letterhead. Um, and that'll work out. So we can work that out. Once you send a request through MedAppTrack, the evaluator will receive an email with the directions. The email does not include the date that the letter is due, so make sure you let the evaluator know when the letter is due, and that is March 15th. When the letter is received, it will be reviewed by me, and then it'll be logged into MedAppTrack. In March, it gets kind of busy, so it may take a week or more for those to get logged. Quick question that I see here, do we have to send core competencies to the professors as well, or is this only for outside evaluators? Most of the science faculty have written a lot of letters, so they have a pretty good handle on it. If you're asking somebody outside the sciences, like an English professor or sociology professor, don't assume that they have written letters before, and I would definitely give them the core competencies. Even with the science faculty, do you have to give them the core competencies? No, you don't have to give them the core competencies. But when you go in with your resume and your list of the core competencies and you're like, I put all this together for you, it just gives them the impression you're really organized and together and you've got all this stuff put together for them. So it's something that they appreciate. And when you go in and talk to them, you want to seem really organized and like somebody, oh, this person should definitely be a practicing physician. So anything you can do to make things easier for them, it's a good idea to do that. So it doesn't hurt to do that. Um, back to where I was. Letters are logged into MedAppTrack. When I receive a letter, I check a number of different things. So I make sure it came from an institutional email address. Then I actually read through the letter. I make sure, especially this time of year, if it's an external letter, that it's got the correct date on it, because sometimes people are still writing 2014 and it's now 2015. I make sure that um, your name is correct throughout, that, if you're female, it doesn't say he at all. So I just read through it, make sure there are no um, small problems in the letter. If there are problems with the letter, I'll email the letter writer back and say, oh, hey, it looks like you forgot to sign your letter. Do you mind signing it and sending it back? So sometimes it does take a little bit longer to get those letters logged. Sometimes people think it's an automatic upload, and they think, well, my letter has been in for 20 minutes, it's not showing up. It doesn't work that way. So please don't email me and say, my letter was in 20 minutes ago, what's up? If your letter has been in for a week and it's not showing up, then feel free to send me an email. But it does take a little bit of time for them to all be logged. Also, please note that you can only ask for letters that you plan to use. We're pretty protective of our letter writers' time. These are really busy people, and it does take them a fair amount of time to write these letters. So if you're not going to use the letter, we don't let you request, for external letters unless you're applying MD and DO, and one's an MD letter and one's a DO letter. Sometimes people will have like a letter writer, let's say they happen to have worked with somebody who works at, BU and knows people on the BU Medical School Admissions Committee, and they want that person to write a letter for BU. You can have that person actually write a separate letter for BU and have that BU letter, that person's letter, uploaded directly into your application. So it wouldn't come to the pre-health office. It would just be an extra letter, and you would just assign that one letter to be you, for example. So that usually the reason people do that is if they have an external recommender or even an internal person who's connected with a school or known at a school, and they want that person to write a letter for a specific school, you can ask for one additional letter that would go to just one specific place. And you would assign it to that specific school. So that's a way to have an extra letter that would just go one place. You wouldn't have it sent to us. Committee letters are written after you apply. Letters and letter packets are uploaded after you apply, so they are a part of the secondary application. They're not part of what schools review deciding to send the secondary application. So sometimes people submit their application and they're like, okay, I'm ready for my secondary, for my letter. It does, especially initially when a lot of people are applying, it takes a little bit of time for us to submit those letters. The reason that we do it this way, though, is that not everybody who does a committee letter interview winds up applying. So what we want to do is spend our time on writing the committee letters for the people who are actually going to apply. So we wait until you apply, and then we're able to use your application in addition to your self-assessment, the MedApp information, and the information from your committee letter interview as a part of what we do to put together your committee letter. So it will take a little bit of time when you initially apply for your letter to be uploaded. For people who apply in the beginning of June, those applications, it takes a little bit of time for them to be verified, and it takes a little while before the letters are released to the schools. For the MD programs, the letters are first going to be released to the schools this year. It sounds like in the beginning of July, and people who apply in the first week, your letters will be attached before the letters are released to the schools. So after you apply, the last step that you'll do is you'll download a copy of your application. For MD programs. You can download a copy of your application with a date, time submitted on it, and you'll send us that copy so we know we're working off of what you submitted, and we'll be using that in writing your committee letter. For other folks, you'll send us a copy of your application in the email that says, okay, we've got it. A few final notes. Don't stalk your writers. It's not going to help. A few people last year, I do remember people saying, I've emailed my writer 6 times and my letter still isn't in. Well, emailing your letter writer 6 times probably did not help them to move faster. It's fine if your letter isn't in a couple weeks before, because we don't include the deadlines. If you're somewhere near them, to just stop by their office just for a little chat, and while you're chatting, hey, by the way, just wanted to remind you, letters are due in 2 weeks. I know you're really busy, but I just wanted to make sure you're all set with that. And the same thing if you're not near them, to send them an email to that effect. Make sure to thank your writers and to keep in touch with them about acceptances. There's nothing worse than writing a letter for somebody and never hearing if they got in, especially if you're accepted into a program. You really want to make sure that your letter writers know that you were accepted. The data shows that one of the top reasons when it comes down to the acceptance point, one of the top parts in who they accept is those letters of recommendation. So you really want to make sure to let those letter writers know, thank you, because you can rest assured that they were a part of why you were accepted. One final thing, letters sent to the pre-health office can only be used for the purpose that they were submitted, which is your application to medical, dental, veterinary, optometry, podiatry school. We can't send them to any other program. So if you're applying, you're thinking medical school right now, and then you change your mind and say, well, I'm going to apply to a PA program, I can't send your letter to a PA program. You have to go back to that original source. And the reason for that is that your letter writer has sent me that letter saying I'm writing this letter for medical school. They haven't said I'm writing this for a PA program. I don't get to decide what they're recommending you for. Only they get to decide what they're recommending you for. So I can't just say, oh yeah, well sure, so and so recommended you for medical school. They also think you're great for the Peace Corps. And yeah, they think you would be fabulous in an MPH program. So it's really important to understand that you have to go back to those people. Now is a good time to start asking for those letters. It gives them a nice window, about 2 months, to write the letters, which is enough time for a busy person to get the letter in and not so much time that they would forget it. You don't want to cut it too close in terms of the amount of time because, if you ask them with only a couple weeks, people can be really busy. And, sometimes somebody will have something like a grant deadline coming up, for example, and they're like, well, I can write this letter after my grant is submitted. But they could have a solid month if they're working on a grant. So you want to make sure that you give them a big enough window of time. 2 months is a reasonable window. If they want to help you get into medical school within 2 months, they should be able to find 2 or 3 hours in which they can write you a letter. And one final thing that I realized I forgot to mention, with the external letters, a lot of the time people have, like, at one position, a couple researchers they worked with, and they'll be thinking, well, I worked with these two great researchers. I think they both have something great to say about me. Which one do I ask? If I don't want to get overlapping feedback, you can actually ask both of them to write a combined letter for you. So they would write one letter and they would both sign it. So that's great if you worked with two people at one research position. It's particularly a good idea if you worked at a research position where there was a PI and a grad student, and you were working mostly with a grad student. In that instance, the grad student may be the person who knows you best and can write the bulk of the letter, but then the grad student and the PI might sign off on the letter. So the PI might be like, yeah, this person seemed great, but I don't really know a lot to say about them. The grad student may then be able to write a lot more about you, and you can get better feedback, but you still want the signature of the higher up person with the title and the degree, and who is maybe a little bit better known. So that's the basic general information about letters of evaluation. For folks who have further questions, for folks who are on the session with me now, I'll answer questions now. If you're listening to this presentation, feel free to email me or set up an appointment to talk about